Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. This week, we stick with one of my favorite topics, which is solar, as you well know. Last week, or last episode at least, we were on the roof side, so very much at the cutting edge on the customer side. This time, we go right the way to the other side of the actual production of solar, as I'm joined by Davor Sutija, who is the CEO of NexWafe. Davor, great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Cool. So there's lots of really good stuff around the product that we're going to dive into. But can you, for starters, just give us a real snapshot of the problem within the solar value chain that you solve?
Yes. There are two problems, actually. So first of all, the way that people make cells and modules relies on a material in the middle, the semiconductor, the silicon wafer. And the way that we've made wafers has not changed appreciably in 30 years. Mm-hmm. They are slightly larger than they used to be, as people who buy, panels can attest to. But fundamentally, what we have to do is we have to do two very energy-intensive steps. First, to make an intermediate product called polysilicon, and then we have to melt that polysilicon in a crucible at very high temperatures, over 1400 Celsius, create a cylindrical ingot, and then we have to carve that up and slice it. By the time you're done in the conventional process, half of the silicon is either lost in the slicing process or has to be recycled.
Yeah.
So that's a problem that we address by going directly gas to wafer.
Okay.
The other problem that I think is very important is that right now, almost all wafers come from one global location, China. And so I think reshoring and creating regional supply chains is something that is also increasingly on people's minds.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're aware very much of the dominance of where many of the materials in the clean technology sector come from. And we're going to touch on this because clearly there are drivers both in the US and in Europe for more local supply, and that's an important factor. But perhaps I always like to start off, Davor, with a little bit of a backstory of the individuals I'm talking to. And yours is obviously a storied background, I guess, but perhaps you can share a little bit of your journey towards joining NexWafe, which is obviously still very much a young company. What led you to join your organization?
Well, I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I started in industry 25 years ago, also in the photovoltaic space. Okay. I joined Alf Bjørseth, one of the early pioneers in solar, in creating an industry in Norway. Because of cheap electricity, mm-hmm. one could use the conventional technology to make ingots and wafers. And in 1998, we started a company in Glomfjord that then later became one of the companies that made up REC, right. Renewable Energy Corporation, yeah. In the solar world. I've joined NexWafe 3.5 years ago because fundamentally I see there's a need to be able to improve the use of silicon in making wafers, saving energy and CO2 emissions. And I see the technology as revolutionary in allowing us to get better performance out of the current technology.
Right. And it's a good place to be and a good time to be there. It's interesting, actually, with I think I talk often that I started in the solar sector back in 2007 and could consider myself an OG, but you really are an OG from the early days. So let's talk about this then, because again, there's a lot of talk amongst the incumbent sort of energy sources that there are negative effects of whether it's electric, batteries, for example, and solar panels and recyclability and the costs, etc. So I think it's really great to be addressing that topic from significantly reducing the cost and the energy cost and therefore the environmental cost for manufacturing solar panels. Perhaps are you able to share a little bit without going into sort of PhD level chemistry, but perhaps share a little bit of how you are able to produce and go through the process of producing much cheaper, much more less energy intense wafers for the solar modules?
Well, to put it simply, instead of having these two steps that I described at the beginning, we go directly from inexpensive commodity starting materials, mm-hmm. gases that already contain silicon, and we put them into an inline process. That means we're continuously putting or depositing wafers in the process. And that allows us to get to a lower cost point while circumventing the need to create these intermediate products that are very energy intensive.
Right.
So by going to just one deposition step and doing it in line, we then can save over 50% of all the CO2 emissions. And, to create solar, 40% of the world's energy will come from photovoltaics by the year 2050. 3% of our total carbon budget is estimated to be needed to build that infrastructure.
Right.
If we can save, and the wafer is not the only part that requires energy, but if we can save half of the energy on the wafer, that saves almost 1% of the total global carbon budget that all of us get to use between now and 2050.
Yeah, it's just crazy, the scale of things. The growth path of solar over the last 15, 20 years has been phenomenal. But the reality is we're kind of only just starting the journey in some way. When you talk about those levels of getting to 2050 and just how much of our global energy supply will come from solar. Again, is that something which has always been on your mind and driven, given that you've been in the sector for such a long time? Did you always anticipate or recognize that the growth curve would be so exponential and continuously so?
Well, I have to admit that when I first started in the industry in 1998, I took a pause in 2002 when oil prices were 18 and the industry was still in a cottage industry phase.
Yeah.
I have to admit that I took a different career path for the next 15 years. I took a printed electronics company public. I was in a unicorn that was acquired by Microsoft. So I have to be very transparent and say, I didn't have that visionary understanding on how much cost reduction one could actually do in solar.
Yeah.
The last 10 years have been dramatic. We've gone from essentially $1 per watt to maybe 10, 15 cents per watt. And I don't think anybody could have really predicted that. But in terms of volumes, we're really at the beginning.
Yeah.
China has already created 900 gigawatts of capacity. And when I started at NexWafe 3.5 years ago, the total installation worldwide was maybe 180. So we're over the next couple of years, we're going to go to 5 times the installation volumes that we just had a few years ago before COVID.
It's absolutely crazy. I think going back to that point, and I remember buying solar panels at $3 a watt, sorry, €3 a watt, which is only 2007-8. So massive reductions in cost so far. But yeah, let's look at then, so your vision, because one of the things I recall, even back only in like 2007, 2008, a lot of the stuff was still produced in Germany in particular and in Europe. And we had a supply, we had manufacturing here. And that obviously rapidly disappeared and shifted to China, as you alluded to earlier. How optimistic are you that we can reshore some of that manufacturing to Europe? Clearly, there are drivers from a political and a policy perspective that are starting to kick in. Let's address firstly Europe, and then perhaps we can talk about the US and the IRA and other stuff as well. But how much do you believe in the Europe in particular can bring back some of that manufacturing capacity?
Well, I think there is an opportunity, but it requires a public-private partnership. And that is really what the U.S. has established with the IRA, but also other countries. For example, India, Turkey, they also have domestic programs that catalyze production domestically. And I think you need to have that if you're going to be able to take on, the industry as a whole, because it's relatively large in scale already.
Yeah.
But one thing I know is you cannot compete with China using conventional technology. Trying to outsize China, I think that's a losing proposition. So you need innovation, and innovation is luckily something that Europe still has in the technology that NexWafe is commercializing from Fraunhofer ISE.
Yeah. And looking at, I recall, obviously we met and we spoke at Eco Summit last summer. So you already have, I think, a site in Germany ready for production, ready for scaling. Tell us where you are actually on that journey of production at the moment.
Right. So as I mentioned, we're a spin-out of the largest solar institute in Europe. It's called ISC, and it's in Freiburg, southern Germany. But we also, I think relatively strategically, we're fortunate in acquiring one of the sites that you mentioned from that time period in the 2008, 2012 epoch. when Germany had a solar valley just south of Berlin, centered on Bitterfeld as one of the cities. We were able to acquire one of those brownfield sites literally for pennies on the dollar because it was not being used, but it already contains the chemical plant that we need for our process. That halves the amount of capital we need to put in.
Yeah.
And we also have access to qualified labor. So in order to be able to take our prototype production in Freiburg and demonstrate it at industrial scale 24/7, there's no faster way to reach those milestones than by leveraging the infrastructure that Germany already has in Bitterfeld.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's an ideal site from many regards, as you say. I mean, that's one of the interesting things in the journey, that, and it's the same with many of our clients in batteries. Also, it's moving from, as you say, from the pilot to or from the lab to sort of pilot scale, and then to sort of pilot production. What's the longer term view? Are you looking at always being a manufacturer? Or is this a technology that at some point in the future you'll license? Is that a decision that's been made, or is that something which is still on the table?
Well, from the get-go, since I've started at the company, our business model has been to find strategic partnerships. Mm-hmm. That means our investors are not just sources of capital for us, but are also able to help us scale.
Yeah.
In the Series C, for example, the Indian company Reliance, the largest in India, the largest industrial concern, they were the lead in that particular funding round, and they have already signed an India Strategic Partnership Agreement with NexWafe,
right,
whereby once we demonstrate scalability in Bitterfeld, they are committing to replicate that and to scale that to gigawatt scale in Jamnagar, Gujarat, where they have their renewable energy facilities. Also, one of our other investors is Aramco Ventures.
Right.
And as part of a convertible that is accelerating our Series D, Aramco also has the option to be a co-owner up to 50% of manufacturing sites that we create in the kingdom. So those are examples of relationships that already show that people are interested in licensing our technology and helping us scale.
Yeah.
The same will be true in North America and hopefully also in Europe.
Okay. Interesting. That's the value of strategics as opposed to obviously purely always either VC or PE money. And you mentioned before, I think that it was at C round was about 100 million raised to date, but you're in another raise at the moment because this is obviously quite capital intensive.
Yes, but it becomes somewhat more shareholder friendly, of course, when you have a licensing model and a partnership model.
Yeah.
So our Series C, which we completed in October 2021, was a raise of 39 million euros, which brought to that point in time our total funding to 80 million in total since the start of the company.
Right.
We have started now a Series D that includes a convertible loan of 30 million that our existing shareholders have given us last year so we could buy the long lead items for Bitterfeld. You know, certain things in Europe have exceptionally long lead items, including transformers and just construction.
Yeah.
So therefore, we've been able to already build the frame of the factory in Bitterfeld using the funds given to us by our existing shareholders. So we are raising a total of 150 million, of which 30 has already been committed.
Yeah.
And our existing shareholders are also committed to participating further in the round. So about half of the monies for the Series D will come from existing shareholders. What we're looking for now is a lead to price the round.
Okay. Maybe we can share a little bit more of that if that's useful in terms of just obviously getting word out there that that's where you are as a business. Just touching back on the thing you talked about, the transformers, and that's another, I guess there's another whole topic around just how rare it is to be able to get a hold of transformers, which is a big inhibitor on the clean energy transition generally. But certainly something which you need to be able to obtain significantly in advance, as you're suggesting there for your own facilities. From your own perspective, actually, coming as a chemist, essentially, you clearly have the technical understanding and experience within the sector. But I'm always intrigued by the CEO or founder or those leaders of businesses who and all the plates that they have to juggle. How have you, I guess, coped, or where is your preference in terms of support on the technical and the product and the sort of the evolution of the product side of things versus the amount of time you must have to dictate to these strategic partnerships and fundraising and more commercial activities?
Well, I think I'm very fortunate because on the technology side, we've been able to recruit an exceptionally broad team. We now have 70 staff members in Freiburg, of which more than 80% are technical.
Right.
We have representation from 17 nationalities, which is perhaps, that's a significant number.
Yeah.
To be able to attract into Freiburg. And it's led by our CTO, Rick Schwartfeger, who joined us last fall. He used to be the CEO of Leading Edge Technology, and he moved from the United States to Freiburg to be able to lead our commercialization. And we also have a deep bench of specialists in everything from chlorosilanes to epitaxy to simulation and equipment design. And so I think that, it is my role to communicate the message, to attract talent, and of course, to put us on the right strategic path. But it is the entire team that is lifting us and creating the innovation that is NexWafe. In addition to the background IP from Fraunhofer, we have 11 patent families that have either been granted or been applied for.
Okay.
So we have a significant amount of innovation that we've created at NexWafe.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting point also, because there's often, sometimes rightly, sometimes incorrectly, an assumption that the Chinese sort of steal everybody's IP and run off into the sunset, so to speak. But in terms of predictability, from what you're saying with the patents and all, you're in a good place to be able to continue your journey without having, while still maintaining the advantages of the innovation that you've created so far.
Yeah, but I think it's very important that to really share how we're creating an innovation culture, because I think that companies that rely only on patents are in a vulnerable situation. Because patents don't just have to be, there are many things you can do. It's not always a violation of patents. You can innovate around patents.
Right.
And so what's very important is that certain things not necessarily get published. We keep certain things as trade secrets, and we continue innovating and improving the process. And it is that continuous innovation that allows a company like ours to be able to create strategic partnerships where people want to license from us, because they know they're not just licensing this node, they're getting access to the further improvements of the product.
So looking at that team that you've are growing and have grown are growing some clearly from various different places and with their various different backgrounds. This thing about innovation is really interesting. I've just been reading a book actually around various different thoughts and ideas on how you maintain or how you create innovation, particularly as companies, either in large companies or as companies scale. What would you say are some of the things that you do as a business which enable you to maintain and continue this innovation culture within the business?
Yes. Well, I think that you have to have structured programs. First of all, we reward everyone who participates in NexWafe. All of our current staff members have virtual stock options. So that means that they win when the company wins. That's it's important to have that kind of an alignment. But also we have hired a patent engineer and external consultants to give classes on how to both structure innovation and how to document it. And we also have both innovation and patent committees that then very quickly go through the innovations that are presented and decide which ones we pursue further, which ones we combine into a patent, and which ones we keep as trade secrets.
Right.
And for every innovation, people are also given a small bonus as a show of gratitude and as a reward for their extraordinary effort.
It's good. As you said, it is always challenging to make sure that there is the reward, as you touched on there, but also just the culture of continuing looking to evolve in something which is always fast paced anyway, which is the sector as a whole. Where you've talked about obviously having the site in Fruhof and the new site in Brandenburg. Where is that? So you mentioned 17 nations. Where are the bulk part of the team at the moment?
Well, 70 people are the ones that are in Freiburg. We also have a smaller team, about 10, that are in Bitterfeld, that are keeping that facility under nitrogen and, helping with organizing the external companies that are doing the construction currently.
Yeah.
We will be hiring approximately 100 staff in Bitterfeld next year as we prepare for start of operations and production at the end of 25.
Right.
And so in terms of, the nationalities, I mean, they're both European, also Asian, North American. So Canada, United States, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, there are many different countries. And of course, many from the subcontinent, from India.
Yeah. I think that's one of the necessities, and we with many of our clients have moved people around. Just recently hired a CTO from the US to come to Europe for one of our battery clients. So the talent pool clearly is a global one, and it's not always easy to attract and facilitate the collection of people with such disparate but such sort of rare talents. And it's good to see that that's something which is a program that you've been able to achieve so far, and clearly will need to continue to do. So go and jump out. You touched on the Davor and the production. So you're hoping to get into production by 2025 at Bitterfeld?
Yeah, I mean, we have currently built the frame of the facility. We expect to complete the Series D in the middle of this year, in Q3. And with that funding, we should be able then to be ready for start of production in Q4 of 2025. Now, of course, production starts do have a yield curve. Yeah. So it's really 2026 when we're going to start seeing substantial revenues. But we already have offtake agreements, conditional purchase orders, and strategic partnerships that include offtake agreements with our various partners. And that means that once Bitterfeld is producing, we already have lined up the commercial agreements necessary for us to benefit from that.
Right.
In parallel, we also established a subsidiary in North America, a subsidiary structure, including an operating company or an LLC in California for business development activities. And we will have special purpose vehicles, SPVs, for the manufacturing facilities that we established there after Bitterfeld.
Right. And where do you see, when you touched on some of the locations already, but and where some of the strategic partners come from, but where do you see as the biggest markets over the next 5 to 10 years for NexWafe?
Well, I think it's going to be essentially global. Currently, half of the world's market is in China. We are focusing on the non-China portion for the time being. So we see great opportunities in North America because of the Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah. There is a special provision that gives you 53 cents for every wafer you manufacture in the United States. And that is expected to be higher than our production costs. So the tax credits alone will give us a strong economic incentive to be able to scale to gigawatt scale in the US.
Right. That's innovative. Yeah, if you can essentially make money whilst giving the product away, if you can sell it also, then that clearly puts you in a very good position.
Yes, and I mean, we expect to have better material properties than conventional Czochralski. We have lower oxygen. We have better technical specs such as minority care or lifetime. So we think there's an opportunity to definitely defend pricing and maybe even get premium pricing in certain markets, for example, in satellites, where we can make ultra-thin wafers directly from the gas phase.
Right. So let's jump back that a little bit from where we started, Davor, in terms of the problems that we're solving here, because as you said, the scale of what needs to happen over the next 20 years or so is phenomenal in terms of the uptake or the growth of the solar installed capacity. You're really looking at making significant reductions in not just in the cost, which clearly helps with the scaling of the sector, but actually significant reductions in the environmental cost of solar. Is this something which you're finding is being received well from both the sort of the funders and the OEMs that you're talking to?
Well, I have to be blunt. I mean, we still don't have a world of carbon taxes. I mean, if we did, then things would be a little bit more straightforward. I think everybody wants to be green, but I think at the end of the day, what really is most important is the performance of our wafers. We've been able to demonstrate that we're essentially a drop-in replacement in heterojunction cells and in TOPCon cells. We have essentially the same performance as commercially available conventional silicon wafers made by the Czochralski process. And now we have an opportunity to improve on that by making thinner wafers. And the thinner you are, the less losses you have in the wafer. And therefore, you in principle can be much more performant. And that, I think, is going to give us a competitive advantage over the next 5 to 10 years because, sawing has its limits. If you try to saw thinner, you start making very brittle materials and you get a lot of micro cracks. So our methodology is really future-proof.
Yeah, those are significant things and always have been in the sector, is the ability to obviously produce and manufacture at scale without some of those defects. Because again, even minor things within the cells can or within the wafers can dramatically affect the viability of the panel, right?
I mean, that's really the advantage. By going to very thin materials, you get a lower cost point and you get higher efficiency, but you have to be able to do it in an automated line. So you have to make sure that your yield stays high and that you don't have any defects in the process. So we are working with companies in the industry to be able to make that possible.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly an exciting time when we look at the growth. But how, I guess, taking your hat off, so to speak, as a CEO, but looking at the sector which you've been in and around for quite some time, the energy sector and the renewable energy sector, how confident are you that we can achieve some of the things that we need to achieve in terms of scaling of both solar, but actually then all of the infrastructure around that? We touched on transformers before. There's a lot of moving pieces in the energy transition, and obviously wafers and then panels are part of that. But do you see the right level of momentum across the sector to be able to achieve that level that you've been talking about for 2050?
Well, for 2050, definitely. I know that a lot of people are a little bit disappointed that we haven't been able to meet the 1.5 targets.
Yeah.
But I think that the 2-degree targets are eminently realistic. As I mentioned, China has already put in place capacity at 400 gigawatt scale. 900 gigawatt scale, which is double last year's installation of a little bit more than 400 gigawatts of photovoltaic installed.
Yeah.
That means that there is going to be sufficient capacity in terms of the entire supply chain. And we believe that by 2030, we can be 5 to 10% of that market. And at that point, then it's unlikely that people will expand in conventional technologies because ours will clearly be the preferred option. And that means that, we can accelerate by emitting less CO2 and really put in a terawatt per year or more already within 5 years.
Right. Which is significant.
Well, I mean, I think that to reach 2050 targets, people have said that you need about 9 terawatts of installed photovoltaic capacity. I think we will actually reach that by 2037. So we'll reach it more than 12 years earlier than predicted. So I'm an optimist on that side.
Yeah. Well, you've been around a long time. That's one of the things I think just consistently since I joined the sector, it's been underestimated the level of growth that could be achieved, in particular in solar, and it's almost amusing.
The growth has really been the last 10 years. It's been 30% growth in installation every year.
Yeah.
So if you are growing at 25 to 30% per year, that means every 3-4 years, you're doubling the size of the market. So if we're already at 400 gigawatts in 2023, that means by 2030, you would expect well over 1 terawatt a year to be installed. And then that means in the mid-2030s, you're already exceeding any historical estimates for 2050. So I think solar is going to be important. Batteries are also important because solar, the sun does not shine 24 hours a day. But very often you can couple it with onshore wind in arid climates.
Yeah.
And that means wind blows more at night and sun shines during the day. So you can actually reduce, not eliminate, but you can reduce the need for diurnal storage.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a very dynamic space, and we see often, and particularly there was a lot of wind in the UK and Europe over the last weekend, where negative pricing for wholesale electricity prices is becoming relatively frequent, actually.
Yes. So that means that, since solar is already the cheapest form of energy, by the time it gets dominant, that means that you'll be able to electrify faster. You'll be able to then also help industries that require significant amounts of electricity. I mean, how will the AI revolution happen if we don't have enough electricity capacity to be able to support that?
Yeah.
So I think that electrification driven by low-cost photovoltaics is essential for many of the other societal needs that we have, including AI.
Yeah, and you touched on one also other sector where again there is obvious space in those hard to abate industries for green hydrogen, and that's again clearly typically going to be produced from renewables, and therefore there's quite a big capacity of solar effectively to be able to produce the green hydrogen that we need.
Exactly, and so then many of the strategics we're looking at really are looking forward to establishing a hydrogen economy, and whether that's with green hydrogen or blue hydrogen or what have you. Renewables as an energy source are an important element of that entire value chain.
Talk a little bit, just to sidetracking a little bit, Davor, in terms of the European policy landscape, because again, we've touched on the IRA and the benefits and how quickly that sort of come to pass and make quite a big difference in the North American marketplaces. By definition, Europe is a bit more complex, but we certainly see, I think, at least a better intention and a better collaboration across the various states on renewables. But do you think there's more that can be done at an EU level to support local supply and manufacture, both for yourself, but obviously for others in the supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an understatement at the end of the day. I think that the Net Zero Act, the European Solar Initiative, those are great starting points. But at the end of the day, we need funding. And in Germany in particular, TCTF 86, which is a government program that was launched with some fanfare last year.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some of the funding sources were declared inaccessible by the Constitutional Court in Germany. I think that we need to see a reactivation of these ideas if we're going to be able to reshore it effectively in Europe. Mm-hmm. I think individual countries have to make a difference. I think the EU as a whole has to allow countries to be able to work with industry to create these public-private partnerships.
Yeah.
And I think that there's also more that can be done to assess whether imported solar modules have components that are based on the use of either in slave labor or conscripted labor, and also have hidden subsidies. As you know, the EU just started 2 investigations in public procurement processes, both in Eastern Europe, that apparently were won by Chinese companies that benefit significantly from these subsidies from the Chinese government.
Yeah. And
this is not a level playing field. So I think that we need to have a balance. Nobody wants to see the cost of solar go up. But on the other hand, we have to make sure that European industry can participate in this renaissance. And so it's important for NexWafe, even though we have a technology advantage, we have to make sure that we have customers in Europe that can build that supply chain and can deliver cheap solar power to Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, there's still, as you say, quite a lot to be done, and the complexities of the European structure sometimes go against it. Clearly, there's great benefits to it as well, but certainly, I think, as you say, there's lots that needs to be done to really get to a point where we can compete with those other dominant places in North America and in China. But it's great to see that there's innovation, like you touched on before. There's a great deal of innovation here that we can capitalize on, and you guys obviously are capitalizing as part of that as well.
Yes, but I think that it's really in the scale up where Europe has struggled, and we're now in a position that we need public-private partnership for scale up. So both ourselves and our downstream customers need to have clear policy initiatives from Europe and from member states that allow planning horizons that allow for long-term investment. So in Bitterfeld, for example, we will go to 250 megawatts show 24/7 production, but to go to 4 gigawatts, which is the potential of the site, with relatively moderate investment, then we need that kind of partnership that I alluded to.
Right. So are there, again, this is quite complex, but are there any particular asks from a policy perspective that you have, I'm sure, been lobbying the relevant parties on, or one or two, I say quick fixes, but one or two areas that would really unlock those sorts of opportunities for yourselves and other businesses within Europe?
Well, I talked about the TCTF funding, so I think you need CapEx support.
Yeah.
Because in order to be able to compete, you have to get to commercially relevant sizes. So I think that we can compete because we're technology enabled on an OpEx basis. But remember, when there is so many hundreds of gigawatts already existing in China, to be able to reshore, we have to be able to demonstrate that our technology is much more CO2 efficient, allows you to create better wafers and therefore cells and modules. And without a public-private partnership, this will probably happen elsewhere, not in Europe.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a message that comes and hopefully is listened to loud and clearly to make sure that enables that to happen. Listen, Davor, it's been great to talk to you about the innovations at NexWafe and to see the journey over the last couple of years that I've seen from the outside. But any sort of parting thoughts, we'll make sure that we point for the audience to the website and to various places they can see and hear more about the technologies and what you're doing. But it'd be good to get some final thoughts from yourself in terms of how you see and what your hope is for the next 5 years. You've already touched on a lot of that, but what do the next 5 years look for the solar industry as a whole, as well as for NexWafe?
Well, as I say, I think that there's going to be continued double-digit annual growth in the sector, maybe even above 20% in terms of installations. And that allows for continued innovation to happen, or it almost requires that, because we have to continue lowering the levelized cost of electricity. And in order to do that, for Europe to compete, for the West to compete, we have to create localized supply chains that benefit from innovation that already exists, such as the innovation that NexWafe is commercializing.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, listen, Davor, it's been fascinating. Thanks very much for sharing your thoughts and sharing the journey so far. Very keen to obviously see the journey as it unfolds over the coming years, and to see the ever dominant rise of solar, which brought me into the sector in the first place. But thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much for the opportunity of being here, and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you, David.